the red flag flying here.
Hello, welcome to Socialist Night Live. We've been away. Although we did have a show last week where I wasn't on, and it was absolutely brilliant, and I loved listening to that as a fan, I guess. It was really, really good about Julian Assange. But we are back after a little break, so it's really nice to see you. Make sure that you put anything that you want to do in the chat, and I'm going to go straight into the introductions today because we are talking today about the cost of living crisis, which is starting to really affect a lot of people and is about to get a lot worse. So firstly, I'll say hello to the people who we already know, brief introductions, and then we'll have our guest, who you may not have had on this show before. You definitely haven't seen on this show before. I'm a bit rusty, aren't I? Anyway, Laura, you show people how it's done.
No pressure. Hello, it's really lovely to be back. Laura, co-founder of Socialist Think Tank. I hope everyone's doing well. We're doing this show on the back of the People's Assembly rally that has been going on up and down the country today. Hope you all managed to get out to at least one of those rallies for at least half an hour. It was a very, very windy day, but it was totally worth it. Something that is so, so important, and I'm really excited that we are able to talk about it a little bit more tonight and share some insight on it. So welcome, and it's lovely to be back.
And Jane.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane from Socialist Think Tank South East, and it's nice to be back with you and very excited to have James with us because he's very good on social media, so I'm expecting very good things from this show.
No pressure then, James. So James, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and why Jane's so excited.
Being very good in social media sounds like I've got a TikTok or something, but tragically I confine myself to rowing on Twitter mostly, and maybe later I'll take it dancing ineptly or whatever it is, the young people, as I have to call them, doing TikTok now. I'll introduce myself. My name's James Meadway. I'm director of the Progressive Economy Forum, so I'm an economist. Used to work for John McDonnell back in the day. Used to be chief economist at the New Economics Foundation, another think tank, actually quite a long time ago now, and have written quite a bit about the costs of living and wages and other sort of issues along these lines over the last sort of year or so.
Okay, thanks so much. So perfect person to have on really for this topic of show. So what we're going to do is go straight into what the cost of living crisis is, because we're talking about this. We've got viewers and listeners from around the world who may not necessarily know what's going on in the UK. So could you give us a little brief outline of what specifically is happening in the UK? What's been happening over the last few years to lead towards this cost of living crisis?
Well, it's not. I mean, it's not just the UK. It's depends on where you're listening in from, I suppose. But across Europe, North America, most of the developed world, there's been this similar issue over the last year. So really, from maybe December 2020, January last year, the prices of some really crucial goods. I can think off the top of my head things like actually coffee has shot up in price. Grain, corn has really shot up in price. Most recently in Britain and Europe, what you've seen, actually also in Asia, you've seen the price of gas, which in Britain gets used very, very substantially for heating people's homes, has really skyrocketed. In the rest of Europe, it gets used more for electricity and this sort of thing. So once the prices of these kind of essentials starts going up, it's things that people can't avoid buying. You can't really avoid eating for any great length of time. It's quite hard if you're in Britain in the middle of December or January to not heat your home, so you have to pay for gas. If the price starts going up, the amount of money that you have to spend on anything else starts to go down. You're spending more and more on the essentials. You've got less left over. So your wages, what you're getting paid, isn't going to keep up with rises in the price of all the other things you have to buy. So you're going to feel this as actually quite like your standard of living, the kind of life you lead is going to look worse and worse because prices of things you don't have much choice about buying are going up and up. And that's the cost of living crisis. That's kind of a description of where people are at the minute.
So Laura, are you seeing any signs of this, like, in your work as a trade unionist or anything like that? Are you seeing signs that people are struggling at the moment?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the trickle in of it. I mean, this is not to say that things have been particularly easy over the past few years. You know, with the last 10 years of austerity, obviously people have been, to coin Rishi Sunak's phrase, tightening their belts, shall we say, over the last few years. But I think we are starting to see this sort of make an impact. You know, I mean, the easiest way to look at it is in terms of how we're seeing it happening is people who have jobs, decent jobs as well, having to use food banks again. Now, we've seen that nurses and people like that have been using food banks. And I guess when we talk about things like this, traditionally we look at the sort of the least well off and the poorest in our society who are going to be hit first. And of course, they always are. We're actually now starting to see those middle income earners who were being squeezed by this. We'll never get to the billionaires, you know, they're never going to feel this. But when we start to see all these different areas of society actually going, all right, my bills are getting unmanageable now. And actually, you know, as James said, these are not things that people want to buy, that they're having to say, you know, maybe I won't get that iPhone this year. It's actual things that they need just to be alive. And when we get to that point where it's almost untenable just to survive the week, that is a crisis. And that I don't think the word crisis is overselling it at all. When we see all areas of society really pinched by this, it's actually quite scary, and something that I think needs to be taken so seriously. People are going to be on their knees in no time.
Jane, you know, we're talking about this, and Laura's from the northeast, and James, where are you based?
God, I'm actually in the Middle East at the minute. I'm in Bahrain, so
wow.
Yeah. So normally in London.
Normally in London, and then Jane's in the southeast there. So, are you? Do you recognise the picture that's being painted at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Our local food bank posted recently, and they've seen demand for food parcels double since Christmas. And I know that things have been getting worse progressively for a long time now. So that's quite a sharp increase. I think obviously seeing the effect of the cut in universal credit, and then people trying to struggle with Christmas, and it can only get worse with the utility rises and the NI increase. It's just frightening.
So, James, we've got this. Obviously, like there are different reasons for this this cost of living crisis, and all the guests have said this has been sneaking up for years. But you know, we've just had a pandemic, and we've just had massive government stimulus to the economy. It appears that has ended up in the hands of billionaires and the richest. So, like, is that the case? Is that what's happening, or is this just simply something that we've got to do? We've got to tighten our belts because we've got to pay back what we borrowed.
I mean, firstly, no. The Rishi Sunak comes out with something along these lines. What's interesting at the minute, I think, we'll see what happens in the next few years, is that the Tories are wary about saying, let's do austerity. They don't sort of want to touch this. They for all sorts of reasons. The primary one is they're concerned about how they're going to win the next election. And having told a bunch of people they don't want to do austerity, and they turn around and do it, they're not going to hold on to votes of people in places like Sedgefield who might have voted for them this time. So straight out austerity, they're quite wary about. What we're getting instead is something that Rishi Sunak has talked about indirectly, but he's talked around this, and something that the governor of the Bank of England, I think, was really blunt about. I mean, this is a guy who's paid just over £500,000 a year, who in a speech in an interview last week said that because prices are going up, because inflation, which measures how much prices are going up, is now really higher than it used to be, so it's about 5 and a bit percent, and expected to go higher still. In other words, prices are going to rise even faster. That's the forecast in the next few months. Because prices are rising so much, people need to not ask for so much pay. right? They need to restrain how much they're asking for in a pay increase this year. Now, firstly, great if you're getting a pay increase of any sort, because a lot of people just don't. But second of all, this is absolute nonsense. The idea that if prices are going up, you're going to turn around and say to people, okay, your money doesn't go as far as it used to. You've now got to have even less money because prices are going up, right? So it's absolutely crackers. So it's a real squeeze on people's living standards at this point in time for him to talk like that. And the reason he's talking like this is because presumably in his head, he has this idea that prices are rising because people are asking for too high wages, right? That's the kind of basics. So lots of economists think like this. And it's nonsense. I've had 10 years in Britain of people's real wages basically either falling or staying just about the same. Most people are kind of, actually, they're probably worse off now than they were in about 2010, right? That's where we are. Now, this is unprecedented. This hasn't happened in this country for 200 years. Not since the Industrial Revolution do you find something like this. So wages haven't really been going anywhere, right? First bit. And if you're saying right now, where is this inflation coming from? Why are these prices going up? What's a really big thing at the minute? Well, it's the price of gas. We're importing gas into Britain now, so the price is international. It doesn't matter if you're a nurse in Britain and you have a pay cut, or you're a cleaner and you have a pay cut. It doesn't do anything to the price of gas that you're buying from Qatar or wherever. It doesn't do anything at all. So it's complete nonsense to say that because inflation is rising, people have to have pay cuts, right? We should be doing the exact opposite of this. Because inflation is going up, wages need to go up more. If inflation's at 5%, everybody's wages should be going up at least 5% because you have to compensate for that. The price of everything, on average, has gone up 5%. Some things have gone up far more than that because inflation is just the average. The price of food has risen much more. The price of gas this year, because the gas regulator, which is a government body, decided to lift the cap on the price of gas. So the price of gas is going to go up about 54% for houses, most households. So that's £700 a year or thereabouts, a huge increase. That's far more than 5%. So yeah, that should be the minimum you ask for. The forecast for inflation by April is it will be 7%. So really pay rises should be 7% in April, right? And that's how we're going to deal with inflation. If it's coming from things you're buying from abroad, wages in Britain have no impact on that. And if it's what's happening in Britain to a whole load of things that are shooting up in price right now, you go and look at what's happened to profits. And you can see that profits in Britain are at an all-time high. Companies have done big companies have done really, really well out of the last year or so. So if you're trying to think about, okay, prices are rising, what are we going to do about it? Well, wages should go up. And if you're trying to find somewhere where money for those wages should come from, it can come from profits because profits have gone up, right? It's putting it in simple terms. But actually, sometimes it is really that simple. And people shouldn't get too confused about what happens with economics sometimes.
Okay. What you've said there makes perfect sense to me on, like, from what I understand of the economy and things. Laura, why do you think that people don't generally get this? Because I feel like people really buy in to what the narrative is in the newspapers, for example. You know, this whole thing that we mentioned earlier on, Rishi Sunak tightening your belt, you've got to do it. All that money went, because I've heard people actually say, we're going to have to pay for furlough somehow. We got all this for furlough. The government gave us this great gift. And why is it? So why does that narrative take hold, do you think?
I think it takes hold because that's the only narrative that we're hearing at the minute. It's all we're getting, and I think there's a lack of understanding, not just from the general public, but also actually those in charge, purposefully treating the economy and telling people that it's just like a household income. And like, oh, I haven't got enough money to be able to afford that, so I better not spend as much. That's not how it works. And actually, if you gave people more money, then they'd have more money to spend in the local economy, and then the money circulates. And that's kind of where this whole trickle down nonsense comes from. It's like, yeah, but we've got all this money, and if we can keep making it, then eventually you'll see it. None of us have seen a penny of any of the billions that have been made out of COVID. And we never will. And like we were talking about this the other day, Paul, with the rise in gas prices. And then the fall in gas prices, I realised that was a long time ago. but they said, oh, gas has gone up, so we need to charge you more for your petrol. And then gas went down, but that never translated to the general public. We never saw that. They just kept that for themselves. And that's the way this is all intended to work. It's to continue to make the rich richer. But they do sell this myth that it is like a household income, and that if we can't afford something, we shouldn't be spending that money. And we're all in it together. So let's all give it a good go and try not to spend any money, and don't ask for things you deserve. And I think we're at a point now where we're just like, right, that's enough. Enough is enough. We can't continue like this. We can't keep, going cap in hand to the government when they should be looking after us better. It is literally their job.
James, did you want to come in there as well? Because I noticed you were going to answer that question too.
It's fine. I mean, look, I agree with that, and I think it's right that you get this sort of mythical version of how the economy works and what's really going on. It's presented by, I don't think it's intentional, right? But it's kind of common sense view of what's happening. You saw, especially with austerity, it was really pushed by the Tories from the late 2000s after the financial crisis. Labour had spent too much money, not true, but Labour had spent too much money, and that's why we all had to tighten our belts. I think that's where the rhetoric came in there. And that meant everybody had to have cuts. And I think it sort of, for a while, I think it tied in with what people were experiencing, right? Because it'd gone in recession and things seemed bad to them. And you can sort of think, oh, things are bad, and I've got lots of debt, and the government's got lots of debt, so I have to watch out for what I'm doing. The government must be doing the same, right? So people sort of see it a bit like that. I think after a decade of austerity, almost, people have got to the end of the tether in this, and they realise that in practice, you've made loads of sacrifices. Loads and loads of people have. Like, pay's gone nowhere. Public services has been trashed, and what's the outcome? Actually, things haven't got better, and a few people at the top have done really, really well. And by the way, that mechanism of a few people at the top have done really, really well has operated spectacularly during COVID. Like, an extraordinary increase in the amount of wealth for the richest over the last few years, at the same time as the government, exactly as people have said, has been handing out billions in these sort of ropey, poorly considered, poorly scrutinised contracts, hundreds of millions disappearing to like friends of various ministers and all this sort of stuff. Vast amounts of money going out there, not very much of it, proportionately speaking, making its way into most people's pockets. And then when you get to the end of last year, coming into this year, you suddenly find prices of really essential goods like gas are going up and people's wages aren't keeping pace. But if you look at the profits of BP and Shell, two of the big producers of gas in the North Sea, it's £40 billion between them over the last year or so. The boss of BP is describing the company as like a cash machine. It's like, these people know that they're onto a good thing. And the demand, I think, has to be, if you're a socialist, if you're on the left, is say, look, those profits don't need to go to actually a few shareholders in BP and the people who own BP and a few rich people at the top. Those profits could be used to make sure that people's gas bills don't go through the roof. That's why a windfall tax is actually quite a good idea. I think windfall tax and also down the line, public ownership and nationalisation. But you can start by making those profits and taking those profits and putting them into good use somewhere else.
Absolutely. Jane, you can come in here as well and put your own opinion in as well. That'd be great. And then would you mind also, I see the comment section is really, really strong tonight as usual. So are there any of those that you want to bring up as well? Any comments?
Yeah, I might actually just go to the comments at the moment because I know James on a tight schedule and there's a few questions for him there already. So and so we've got, just to mention, we've got Zach from North Carolina tonight, Andy's in the Isle of Wight, Kerry's in Middlesbrough, and Neil was at the Manchester demo today. So we've got a nice spread of geographical viewers. We've got Julie's mentioned that people have forgotten the damage the Tories did previously, where we ended up with the poll tax riots. We've got Quantum Skyline, Jacqueline and Leanne have all mentioned the huge increase in the cost of basic foods that they've noticed just in the last few weeks, let alone over a longer period of time. Amelia said we need to get power back at local levels. That's not a question, but maybe an interesting point, but we have got some other questions. So Leanne, Neil T and Neil F have all made comments around, the payouts that are going to the big bosses. They are not questions. The dodgy loans that have been written off recently, and the fact that ordinary hard people are now being asked to pay basically for the mistakes of privileged elites. Paul Smith mentioned about the governor of the Bank of England pushing this nonsense that ordinary people should be denied pay rises. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I was looking earlier and I did work out that the governor of the Bank of England, on his salary, would take home £25,000 a month after tax in his pocket. And the audacity of someone telling someone on minimum wage taking home £1,200 a month to tighten their belt. If high wages are a problem, it's quite strange that he doesn't think his bank balance of £25,000 a month is a bigger issue. Amelia said we need higher wages, and just look at what austerity's done to Greece. And then we've got some questions here. So Carl says, does increasing interest rates help the upper middle class who are more highly leveraged, those with several buy-to-let mortgages? Is there a risk of causing a recession by not compensating for the inflationary pressures? Decrease in spending leads to failure of small or medium-sized businesses. So there are two more questions, but that's quite a lot. So I don't know if you wanted to come straight in on that, if you don't mind.
I'll come in that. It's a very good question about interest rates, because this is what Governor of the Bank of England has been talking about, and what the Bank of England has decided to do. That as the central bank, it is supposed to be the institution that attempts to control inflation. That's kind of the mandate it has. These are the set of instructions it has from government. And it does that by, it has control over one of the interest rates, that not actually one that you or I can really use. If we go and use a credit card or something, we're not paying the interest rate that the Bank of England has set, but it's one that the big banks can use if they need to borrow money from the Bank of England. And it kind of starts to control what happens in the rest of the banking system. So that's the idea. And they pull on this thing in the belief that if you push up interest rates, the Bank of England tries to push up interest rates, it becomes harder to borrow money. People therefore borrow less and spend less. The economy cools down a bit and you get less inflation. That's the theory. Now, what that means in practice is that you're saying the way to control inflation is to try and make something a bit like a recession happen. That there's too much spending taking place, there's too many people in jobs, they're all being paid too much money. So you want to pull back in that by using this interest rate to do it. So it's already a bit dodgy to try and do that. If your inflation is coming from big international things, so the rise in the price of gas, right? That's got nothing to do with anything really that's happening in Britain. That's to do with the end of lockdowns, a surge in demand for gas, particularly in Asia, actually. If you look at the price of food, this has been driven by droughts in Brazil, forest fires and things in Canada affecting grain production. I mean, all sorts of big environmental factors. Fiddling about the interest rates here doesn't magic up more gas from Norway or wherever you're trying to buy it from, right? It doesn't make any difference. But it might well, exactly as the question said, make it harder for people who've borrowed a lot of money, because suddenly the interest rates that they're paying on that money they borrowed, and lots of people have ended up in a lot of debt, particularly over the last 2 years, suddenly life looks harder for them. And you're going to make no difference to inflation, because the inflation isn't coming from what people in Britain are doing. It's coming from the rest of the world. So it's completely, it's really the wrong thing to be doing. And they're kind of doing it because they have to. You know, the Bank of England has got a couple of things it can pull on, and interest rates is about one of the two things it's likely to be able to do. So it's that usual thing, if you've got a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I mean, that's kind of the stupid situation we've got to here. But there's a nastier edge to it, which is when you start saying, exactly as you said, Jane, that you have this very well-paid head of a bank, Bank of England is a bank, £500,000 a year, who ends up telling people on a fraction of that they're the ones who have to carry the weight of this inflation. Not, companies like BP and Shell making astronomical profits, but people working in perfectly ordinary normal jobs. You're working at Tesco's, you're working at BP or Shell. You're not the chief executive or something, but you're the person who's been asked to tighten your belt. It's completely nonsensical stuff.
Thank you for that. We've got Neil's mentioned, didn't Mark say in Work Labour Capital that if workers can't afford to buy the things they're making, the economy will grind to a halt? So I don't know if you wanted to say something on that. I have got another question for you though. So Quantum Skyline said, if the rise in inflation can be controlled if everyone has wage rises to match and spendings in things like gas and food maintains bringing prices down. But I don't know if that feeds into what you're just saying really. It doesn't, I think it's... saying if everyone has the same wage rises,
Yeah.
and we've matched that up with the increase in gas and food, but it sounds like
Yeah.
there are international pressures and it's just out of our control to think about
It-
doing that.
I mean, you could. I mean, the government does control the price of gas that people have to pay in their homes to heat their homes, right? That's what the gas price cap is about. This is what happened last week when the gas regulator, which is called Ofgem, decided that they were going to take the cap, like the limits and how much the price can go up, and going to increase that. And the reason they did this is actually bluntly, it's to protect businesses and the profits of businesses that are supplying gas to people's homes. We have this gas industry in Britain that is incredibly privatized relative to other countries. It's all basically privatized. It's all free market is supposed to determine what happens. This was the big thing in the 80s into the 90s. New Labour and government continued it. This was going to be the way of the future. This is going to supply everybody's energy needs forever if we just privatize everything. I mean, you can argue that when gas is cheap, it doesn't look too bad for people in just ordinary households. But if the price of gas goes up, the free market says, well, that means that all these households have to pay more. So the government introduced a cap a few years ago under pressure from Labour at the time. This was Theresa May brought this in. But now, because all the companies that supply gas are screaming and shouting about not making enough money, the regulator is just increasing the cap because they want to protect profits, right? That's it. It's a political decision to protect profits and to protect how the industry is organised, privatise. So instead of saying we're going to protect households, we protect profits. So they whack up this thing. And it's like, they're saying it's £700 a year more that people are going to have to pay. I mean, it's like, okay, I don't always use Andrew Bailey as the example, but I'm sure he can find the 700 quid. Right? If you're on minimum wage, you're not going to be able to find that. Not a chance. And Rishi Sunak's offered this pathetic solution. It's not a solution at all to it, which is like some people in the right kind of council tax band will get 150 quid. Well, all right. And then everybody else gets a loan of £200, whether they want it or not. So it's just more debt. What's his solution for a load of people who are in debt facing big gas bills? It's more debt, whether you like it or not. Absolutely, it's just all of this. This is why I call it a crisis. All of this is turning into a huge, huge problem. I saw someone in the chat mention the poll tax and how that was got rid of back in the 90s. Tories introduced a tax. Everybody's going to pay the same rates, whether you were the Duke of Westminster, whether you were unemployed, pay the same rate. Community charge, they call it. Everyone calls it the poll tax, like the Peasants' Revolt back in the 1300s. Mass non-payment campaign. People just refused to pay it. Big protests turned into a riot in London. Tories got rid of it. So you can change these things. And if there are protests over what's happened on the price of gas and the gas price cap, I think that can shift as well. That this is something that I think the government is weak on because they can see the crisis coming and that we can make a difference out of.
We're going to speak a little bit more about the protests later, and Laura's got a lot on that, and we were at one of the protests today in Newcastle. What I wanted to bring up now was the response, because in the last, you do have to go at about 22, don't you? So in the last few minutes, I want to talk about, could the government response have possibly been worse? Because there are things that they've done that I can't, I find the rise in national insurance completely unfathomable. What a terrible thing to do at a time of raising costs for people, because they're not only raising the costs of, raising the cost of living by raising the national insurance tax, which is disproportionately affects lower paid workers. They're also doing that for employers as well. And I think I'm a teacher trade unionist, and I'm thinking, well, when that goes up, that means less budget for my school. That's going to mean redundancies as well. Yeah. So, is there anything else they could have done that was more stupid than also raising national insurance at this time?
I mean, you can try and think of some, and maybe soon they'll hit on a few. I mean, but this is quite spectacular. Yeah, exactly as you say, right? It does affect employers as well. So it's going to be more expensive to hire people. Now that doesn't sound like a great idea at this point in time. And in particular, it's going to squeeze a whole load of people who are already facing squeeze, and it's unnecessary. I mean, this is where it gets really stupid. There is no reason to do this. I'm going to address because somebody raised it in the questions about, well, we've got all this debt from like the first 2 years of COVID. We borrowed a huge amount of money. I mean, really colossal amounts. So the government's debt has gone way, way up into very, very high levels, unheard of for many decades. The last time we had a debt this big was after the Second World War, when fighting the Second World War was very expensive. You borrow a lot of money, and we were just paying that debt down. So it's back to the 60s. But the thing is, you fight the Second World War, you borrow the debt. It's not like everyone rushes to repay that debt when the war ends. It wasn't like the Labour government got elected in 1945, said, right, first thing we've got to do is repay the debt, austerity for everyone. That's the priority. They didn't do this. They built the NHS, expanded free education, built the welfare state, built council houses. They didn't say, okay, the debt is the most important thing. And they were right. Because when they had a growing economy, when they had lots of people in work, the debt's easily dealt with. It really doesn't matter that much. And it's the same thing with COVID now. The first 2 years of COVID were incredibly expensive. You paid for furlough. It was a major, major national crisis. Everybody who's lent you the money as a government to do this, it gets a bit more complicated because of some of the things the government did here, but they don't care about whether you borrowed that money for a national crisis. You don't need to rush to repay this stuff. It's far more important to try and get the economy back in its feet. And I think when we say that, that means getting people back on their feet, getting an NHS that works, getting public services that work. You talk about the economy as a big abstract thing. I mean, let's talk about what this really means. People in good, secure jobs paid more with public services that work, just as that's what we should be aiming for. That's what you do first, and then you can worry about what the government debt is doing or not doing. And that's the order of priorities. So what you got with the Tories instead, particularly with Rishi Sunak, because he's one of the worst people for doing this, and the institution he's in, the Treasury, which is supposed to look after the nation's finances, manage the economy, that sort of thing, is kind of obsessed with this way of thinking. They are always trying to look for, oh, well, we have to balance the books. Oh, well, we have to repay stuff. I mean, it's just damaging for people. We had 10 years of this nonsense with austerity. As I said, I think it's less likely to happen this time around. I think the politics around austerity, partly because, actually very largely because we had a Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn that fought against it, right? The politics around it is very different now. But nonetheless, Rishi Sunak is there saying, oh, well, we borrowed all this money, we're going to have to repay it, therefore national insurance has to go up for most people. But even then he's wrong, because he could have just said, okay, we're going to go and tax some of these massive profits that have been made. We're going to find some of the wealth that, the 1,000 richest people have seen their astronomical increases in the amount of money they have over the last 2 years. We're going to tax them. But he's not going to do that because he's a Conservative Chancellor, right? So national insurance rise for most people instead.
Amelia's just said there, isn't this so obvious though? Why aren't people reacting? Now, this is also my experience. So I've spoken to a few people this week who've suggested we need a revolution, and these are not revolutionary type people. These are people who voted for Boris Johnson last time around, for example. And people are also saying things like it's very obvious that we should nationalise energy companies, and it's very obvious that we shouldn't have outsourced the storage of gas to I think it's Germany and somewhere in Scandinavia, I believe, that store the gas, who were obviously prioritising their own countries at this time. So I guess a question would be why aren't people reacting? Is this obvious?
I think it's one of those ones where, look, there's a whole load of things that have gone wrong for a long period of time in Britain that people can see in their heads that there's a problem. Like, you go and look at opinion polls, you just go and talk to your friends or family or whatever. Pretty much everyone will say something has to change. The difficulty we've always had is getting all those people together in the same place and therefore making something happen. I thought we saw a bit of this around, particularly the 2017 election was a moment a bit like that. You had a lot of people together in the same place and saying something has to change. It wasn't quite enough to get Labour elected at the time, unfortunately, but it was something. And so you do sometimes get these moments where you have this coming together of people. And that's why I think what happened today with the protest is so important, because it's a start in that process. If you want something to change, you or I or all of us all sitting individually and saying, actually, I'm pissed off with the state of the world, doesn't do anything. All of us working together to build a movement, to create organisations, try and win the arguments with more people, that's where it starts to move. And this has an impact. People would have seen, you'd seen, because you can make the comparison, in France, they've limited the price of energy increases to 4%. Here, 54%, the government's saying it has to go up. France, 4%, so the government says maximum this year. The reason that happens isn't because Emmanuel Macron's such a great guy and he cares for people so much. The reason they're doing that is because they are absolutely terrified they'll get a second Gilets jaunes protest and people out on the streets saying we don't want these massive increases in how much it costs to heat our houses in the middle of winter. So of course they're going to limit the price rise to 4%. In Britain, the government's less bothered about a protest movement, right? So it's a 54% increase instead. Now that should tell you that it makes a difference to organise and protest and build a campaign, right? That should be the key to what people get out of this one. And that we don't have to sit there thinking, oh, well, this is just like a force of nature that we can do nothing about. If the government wanted to reduce the price of heating people's houses, it could. And it could make the costs of doing that go on to the profiteers who in this situation have made absolutely billions over the last year or so. It's not, this is politics. And it's the politics of working out who's going to lose out and who's going to benefit from what's happening at the minute. And people need to be clear that we should say most people shouldn't be losing out because of the environmental crisis, because of the rise in the price of gas, because a few people want to make absolutely billions out of the oil company that they happen to be running, right? That's not how the world should work. But until we're organised, until you've got lots of people saying something like this, until you've got a movement that can say something like this, it's not necessarily going to change. And that's the difference.
I'm going to ask you one final question, then you can do your summing up. Is the fact that governments around the world have invested a lot in their countries over the past couple of years, and that appears to have had the effect of increasing the wealth of billionaires, is that, and it's at a ridiculous rate, is that a massive warning sign to everyone in the world that the world's economies are entirely broken, not fit for purpose, and need a complete revamp?
Well, it should be, shouldn't it? It's like the inequality has returned to the kind of levels it was at before 1914. You can, Thomas Piketty's the economist that people may have heard of, who's done the work on this. There are others, obviously many others. But we're at the kind of levels of inequality we saw before the First World War. This is a gilded age for a few people at the top who are making extraordinary amounts of money. But at the same time, if you take the last 10 years, it's not just Britain where most people's living standards haven't really moved. Take the other sort of big economies, take Europe, take North America. Very, very similar picture for most people. So there's something fundamentally not working here. If a very small number of people are doing very well out of what has happened for the last 10 years or so, and then if you take the last 2 years, just with coronavirus, it's even more so. We have this terrible pandemic and somehow this results in billionaires becoming even wealthier, right? That's what's happened. This is fundamentally broken as a system. There's something really, really seriously going awry here that needs shifting. And some of that is addressing that inequality. And I think the other part is addressing the environmental crisis, right? Which is, by the way, lurking behind a lot of these price rises is exactly that. Now, if there's an environmental crisis caused by years of pollution and climate change and the activities, ultimately the way we organize our economy around these sort of capitalist demands for more profit, and therefore you don't care too much about the environment, it shouldn't be ordinary people who pay the costs of that. So there has to be, I think, also this idea that if we're facing environmental crisis, the costs are going to land on the big companies, on the billionaires, and they're the people who are going to pay for dealing with this, and we're going to address inequality at the same time. Those would be the two fundamental things you need to change. And that's a movement that can do that. And I think also there's a need to try and shift politics in Britain around these sets of questions. It's not necessarily easy to do that. And things for 2 years, I think, particularly since Jeremy Corbyn is no longer running the Labour Party, it looks a lot less sort of open to this. But if we can get a movement outside of Parliament, if we can get enough people talking like this and thinking along these lines, that's the kind of force that starts to shift what happens in Westminster as well. That my own impression is that when you have the political sort of chaos you see, and all right, all comes through as who's going to replace Boris Johnson, is he going to go, and that sort of thing. But behind that is a real sort of political tension and crisis about how you even manage Britain if you're sitting as the government in Westminster. In that situation, it's open for the sets of ideas that say ordinary people shouldn't carry the cost of this. And that's the fundamental thing you want to say as a socialist. And here's going to be our vision of what a different world could be.
Well, that was a brilliant summing up. Thank you so much,
No
James.
worries.
We're going to let you go. Thank you on behalf of
Thank you.
Socialist
I'm
Think
sorry,
Tank.
I wasn't slightly longer, but I've got to rush off this evening, unfortunately. But happy to come back if wanted.
Oh, you'd definitely be wanted, won't you? Then I think Laura will be pestering you. Is that right?
Yes, 100%.
No worries. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers then. See you.
Thanks. Bye bye. Okay, so we are now going to. I'm going to try something. We thank you so much, and I hope everyone at home has really enjoyed listening to James there. And I think those explanations are powerful, and hopefully we'll be able to use those again in the future. People saying he was brilliant, and thanks for coming on, and all those things. So we're really grateful to James for coming on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to play a clip from earlier on. So Laura, can you explain what we were doing earlier on today and the context of this little clip?
Yeah, absolutely. So today was a national demonstration against this horrendous cost of living crisis arranged by the People's Assembly. We went to the People's Assembly rally in Newcastle to listen to some fantastic speeches there. We caught up with our old friend Ian Lavery, and I just asked him to tell us a little bit about why we were there and what it was all about. It was very windy, so I apologise for the quality of the video, but I couldn't let him get away without giving us a couple of words.
Okay, so I am going to hopefully be able to do that for all of you. Jane, you won't be able to hear it unless I do something. I'll try and do something clever in the middle of this, and so that you can listen too. But I may be busy trying to make it actually work. So apologies if it doesn't work. I will get it to work at some point, but we'll see. We're just going to see because I haven't tested this yet. So let's go.
Well, it's simple. The country's on its knees. People are basically finding themselves in the biggest financial crisis has been probably since 1945. Cost of living, the standards of living is decreasing rapidly. And people are going to find quite simply that they cannot afford to live. And I kid you not when I say they cannot afford to live. What we actually will be experiencing very shortly is people dying as a result of this government's policies. We've got billionaires increasing their wealth by £3.6 trillion, whilst at the same time people at the other end of the political spectrum cannot afford to put food on the table. You've got the energy companies making $40 billion in the last year, laughing, saying that it's like an ATM, it's like a cash point. They're making as much money as they possibly can, and they haven't got a clue what to do with it. While people are dying in their homes because of heat, a lack of heat. There's one person every hour dies in this country because of heat. Yet we've got people making these gross sums of money. So we've got to start and resist. We've got to stand up. We've got to rise together. We've got to make sure that the unions, the civil society, charities, individuals, communities rise together against these Tory implementations, which are destroying society.
So that was Ian Lavery, and as usual, Ian sitting on the fence there in his own. He's not exactly a fence sitter, is he? So massive fists as well. He's like, he's got the biggest fists known to man. There was a photo of us two together, and he, big fist, dwarfs mine. Anyway, and a lot of people saying he's right, spot on, and Jeanette Hargreaves-Lee's saying thank you for sharing with us. I was too poorly with walking issues to join the event in London this time, but hopefully we'll do next. Again, that's one of the important things that people like Socialist Think Tank can do, bring these events to you and have those people represented at those rallies. So we're really proud to do so. So, Jane, did you get to any events today, or did you watch some from home? Or?
I didn't. I know Socialist Think Tank West Midlands shared some footage from the protests local to them, but I'm afraid that's all I've seen so far. But I've barely disagreed with Ian, so although I didn't hear that, I'm doubting that I'm going to disagree with what he was saying.
Yeah, sorry about you not being able to hear that one, but yeah, maybe next time, maybe you can listen back a little bit later on. Laura, so you were there today. You heard some speeches. You saw what the event was like. Were there any highlights for you, or is there anything like of concern or?
Well, I mean, I think the whole thing is of concern. The fact of the matter is we need to mobilize, we need to be doing these events, like James has said, like Ian has said, we need to come together and fight this. um the issue with that is we're not we're not particularly in a position where coming together in big crowds is very welcoming for people at the minute. Also, there's the sheer fact of the matter that people are desperate and just on their knees. The thought of going into a big city centre and standing waving flags, I think some people feel like, well, is that really going to achieve anything? But what we need to remember is that this is the only way to achieve anything, to come out in mass against a few people who are making these decisions that are absolutely killing us. And mark my words, I do believe we are going to see some deaths as a result of this. Whether people, there's this is why I really hate the saying, well, it's either heating or eating, because I think that sort of minimizes it, and it's become, catchy. And I know politicians have to do catchy things to try and get people's attention, and that's really important. But if you think about that and what that means in reality, you have to choose to be warm enough or to starve or be able to eat some food. We are, so many of us up and down this country are living that reality now. And we've talked about the price of gas going up. We've had our initial increase, and we've put 6 million people in fuel poverty now. But it looks like there's going to be a secondary increase in October. And I don't know how many people are aware of that, but if that happens, things are going to get even worse. And in October, when it's getting colder and colder, and we're heading into the depths of winter, how are we going to manage that unless we stand up to it? This, like Ian said, and like James has said, and like we've all said, this can't be okay. This can't be something that we allow to happen, and we are just allowing it to happen at the minute. And it feels like this Tory government just keep pushing our boundaries and seeing what they can get away with, and we keep allowing them to get away with all of these horrendous things they've been doing, not just over the last couple of years, but historically. And I just think it's all desperate, and the only way we're going to be able to change things is if we all come together and really, really make a lot of noise about how dissatisfied we are with this government, and that's to put it mildly.
We're going to go to our other guest that is at home, and all of you at home at the moment flying through. I'll come to you in a second, Jane, to do them. There were a couple that I can answer quite quickly because having been at the rallies, it makes it slightly easier. So Amelia asked, were there many at these events? Because I had to work. There weren't a huge amount. There were 2 rallies going on in Newcastle, and they joined up, which made it a bigger rally. But I think again, this was done at quite short notice. So I'm going to bring in Quantum Skylines. Like, how do you find out about these events? This was a People's Assembly Against Austerity national event that they organised at quite short notice. We did retweet this, but it is one of those things about how can you actually make sure that everyone finds out about these things, and retweeting something doesn't necessarily mean that all your followers will see it. And I guess maybe what we can all do is, if we all retweet it, then that does help that sheer volume of liking and retweeting and things like that. It's one of the only things we have. Although I do have suspicions that algorithms are messed with to make sure that things like this don't get necessarily the amount of publicity that they should. So yeah, there's a lot of people talking about protesting in numbers, and maybe we should do, I think it was Neil said, some non-violent direct action to show our strength of feeling. Yes, and then Carl is saying that he thinks that they're already prepared for that. They've already set up their plan for that. But maybe this is the way things are heading at the moment. Jane, I'm going to bring you in there.
Oh, we've had such a lot of comments though from the viewers. I'm just looking at one that Julie's put in, which is really heartbreaking actually. So she says it is in some respects heating or eating. She has breast cancer, and with SSP and a very small amount of universal credit coming in, she's left with £6 a week to get food, cat food, petrol for the car, mobile phone, and pay for hospital car parking. She's now returned to work with no treatment because she can't afford to be off any longer. I don't know what to say to that. That's just terrific. That's so wrong. That shouldn't be happening. That's inhumane.
We did say at the last election it was socialism or barbarism, and I know Alan Margin from the Durham Miners Association said that a lot. I know it isn't his original phrase, but he would repeat that quite a lot, and it seems that we are moving towards barbarism when we hear examples like that, you know. And Socialist Night Live, it's the kind of show we do quite like being light-hearted on here, and it's very difficult to be light-hearted when the reality of the situation is so bleak for a lot of people. But again, there was something else in the comments there, where people were talking about, like, someone mentioned it was the 5th richest economy in the world, Midnight Cow, the 5th richest economy in the world. How is this happening? I actually don't think we are the 5th richest economy in the world. Like, they always say it's the 5th or the 6th. But what is our economy? Our economy is an extremely worrying it is an extremely worrying thing, where a lot of money is going through the city of London. Not a lot of money is going through the actual economy that people use and feel in our communities, basically. Not a lot of money is being spent at our level, but lots of money is being taken off to the Cayman Islands, and because it's going through the city of London, it's counting as it's appearing that we have a better economy than we do. It is a bit of a bluff, so I wouldn't say necessarily that we are this amazing economy, because the economy isn't working for the people. So that's probably a bleak, but it's my feelings on that. I did also hear as well that some people, I can't tell you where this actually came from, but someone I know of is aware that a Mexican drug cartel is trying to buy our infrastructure. It's trying to invest in British infrastructure. And the reason they want to invest in British infrastructure is, one thing, they can launder the money. And another thing is that they can actually make money out of our infrastructure, because we sell off our infrastructure to everyone else, and we see what happens when that happens. You know, we've got all sorts of different people who own our railways and make profit out of it, which reduces their bills, and we're seeing what France can do. Well, that's EDF. EDF have huge stakes in our energy over here, and that's the situation we find ourselves in, because we have no ownership. And I often find that's a very strange thing when people feel so patriotic and they're like, oh, you're not a patriot if you're on the left. We actually think that the country should own its own facilities. We think that British people do deserve to have a stake in the things that they need, such as energy and water and you know, and the roads and all these things. We feel that. That's what we feel. That's our form of what you would call patriotism. That's us being patriotic, caring about our country enough to think that we can run it ourselves for the benefit of its people, rather than some jingoistic message where, like, you're saber rattling, waving a Union Jack and just pretending that you care about the country, while really you're running it into the ground for the benefit of a very few people. Sorry for the rant there, Laura.
Always rant. I don't think you'll get anybody who disagrees with you there. I'm really sad because I can't see all the comments. I see little flickers of them, and they've been so good tonight. And I love the fact that people really get involved with our shows, and we have brilliant chats and just so much amazing input. We need more like this. We need, you know, independent media in the UK is absolutely fantastic. It needs to get out there a lot more. We need to be having these conversations on a much bigger scale, because it's like I say, it's the only way we're going to change things. So do keep sharing and liking, and go and find all of our media friends and share, like them as well. And yeah, just keep it up, and thank you for being part of it. Like, things are so sad and bleak and terrifying, but knowing that there's other people out there who think the same as we do really helps. It really, really does help. At least we feel like we're doing something.
Jane, are there any other comments that you'd like to bring in?
Yeah, just Constance Collins says as long as we can still pay for our internet, we'll be here. So who knows how long that will be. So
Well,
just going back quite a little bit actually though, there were a few comments earlier. Neil F said they knew about climate change back in the 70s, so why are we still so dependent on fossil fuels? I know it's an indirect link to what we're talking about, but just the lack of, it just shows the priorities of governments, the short-sightedness and the greed behind decisions. We're still not investing in green energy now, are we? We need we need that Green New Deal. We need proper, well-paid, unionised jobs, building a green infrastructure that will set us up for the future in so many ways, and they're still not doing it. And Midnight Cow had said, we've seen a transfer of enormous quantities of money out of the public purse, the enormous burden of government debt we've amassed. It's us that we've been paying for this for generations. And I'm just thinking about, our train companies, our appalling excuse for a train service, which is the most expensive in Europe, unreliable, dirty, unpleasant, and basically run by the government run, train companies of other countries who have a far superior and cheaper service than ours and use the profits from our appalling taxpayer subsidised services to make their own services even better, and fair enough to them because our government's stupid enough to deal with things on that basis.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
when we're looking at all of these problems, most, and I mean, when I say most, I mean almost all of the problems that we experience in this country and in others, we can trace back to capitalism. I really do believe that. It's always about somebody finding a way to make some money off the back of other people, off the suffering of other people, or just out of sheer greed, that and lack of care. Yeah, we knew about climate change in the 70s, but also we can make a lot of money from oil. So I'm not bothered about that. I won't be alive then. I'll have enjoyed my billions by then, kind of thing. And that mentality is still absolutely there, probably more so now when we see how much that Rishi Sunak and all of his rich mates are like billions. I can't even imagine what a billion looks like. That it's just astronomical. And it's we're living in a capitalist world, and that wins everything. If you've got money, you've got the power to make the decisions, and everybody else are the people who suffer.
It's really interesting at the moment because I speak to people from across the political spectrum, and there's a lot of ideas that are totally rubbish, as if they're just talking nonsense. But like, people who are they'll say someone's a climate change denier, and they're not denying climate change. What a lot of the time they're saying is there are climate change deniers. There really are, and there are people who are paid to come up with reasons to deny climate change by, funnily enough, the oil industry. But there are also some people who are accused of being climate change deniers when actually what they're saying is, why are people going to make so much money out of it? And they can see that there is a racket going on. And it's the same argument that we're making. Like, capitalism thinks that the only thing that can save the environment is capitalism, when actually capitalism is doomed to destroy the environment. And they come up with something like, well, we can continue consuming what we currently consume. We'll just do it with electric cars, and we'll absolutely destroy places like Afghanistan, where they need the minerals from to build the batteries for the electric cars. And then subsequently they'll put the price of electricity up, and they'll do all these things, and they'll continue to make all this money out of us while saying they're doing it with a green slant. Look at us, we're saving the world. You're not saving the world. You would save more by maybe saying something like, I don't know, maybe traveling to work would be part of your day. You would have to be paid for that. And all of a sudden, you've got to pay people for that section of the day. So maybe you want to employ people who live a bit closer, rather than, such as in I see this a lot in teaching. There's always a mythical teacher that's better than the ones you've got, who may live miles away, and they'll get someone who's like, yeah, we'll get someone from 100 miles away, and they'll commute, and they'll come in, and they'll be brilliant. And they turn out to be exactly the same as everyone else, because like people are pretty similar. And rather than that mentality that there's always someone better out there, why not focus on your own local community and stop traveling so far, and stop having people pollute on a daily basis in a way that they shouldn't have to? There are different solutions than the ones capitalism presents, and the main one is consume less. And capitalism needs us to consume more. And I think sometimes we need to recognise the arguments that are coming from the other side, that some people are saying, there's this argument that actually they're not saying climate change isn't there. They're saying this is a racket, which it is. So we need to kind of recognise some common ground sometimes. Carl's saying graphene supercapacitors are almost there, so that'd be nice.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what it is either, but Carl knows his tech, and that'll be a good thing. Graphene supercapacitors. But like graphene as well. Graphene's something that was developed using government resources, Manchester University, the UK resources, and then it was immediately sold for a really tiny amount, like something like 5 million, where it's going to be a multi-billion-pound industry that if they'd have invested and said, actually, we can be world leaders in graphene, which will be a really brilliant advancement. Instead, they sold it off because they didn't have faith in Britain to manufacture it. And it was it's British ingenuity that came to it. So again, we come back to the patriotism thing. I would rather think, let's do it locally. I would give away patents as well, of course, because I think that would be, anything that's better for the world would be a really positive thing. But, yeah. I've done another rant, haven't I? Sorry, everyone.
We love your rants, it's fine.
We've missed them.
Thanks. Okay, so I think we will start to wrap up now. So what can we do? I think that should be the question for all of us. What can we do to address this cost of living crisis? Jane.
Oh, I wish I had a good answer for that. I mean, we need to try and stick together and support each other. Just the huge financial stresses that are going to be on individuals just to be able to maintain a decent quality of life. I don't really know how we can fix that ourselves. But we have to put pressure on the government. There needs to be so much pressure that they can't ignore this. I think right now Boris Johnson's in quite a vulnerable position. It seems to me that Rishi Sunak is quite ideologically opposed to public spending, but obviously it's very much in Boris Johnson's interest to get people to like him a little bit right now. So I don't know, try to just make as much fuss as we can. It's not a great answer, but I'm a bit at a loss. This is such a big, it's just happened so quickly. It doesn't feel very real, but it is horribly real.
Okay, Laura?
I think I'm similar to Jane, really. It just seems like such a huge problem. I guess what I would say is use your trade unions to fight for decent pay and don't stop fighting for that. Collectivism with your trade unions, collectivism with your communities. Be loud, protest this. I realise that now we aren't officially allowed to protest, and there is the threat of prison, but we need to come out in force on this one, because a few people shouting into the wilderness is not going to do a damn thing. We really need to understand what's happening, recognise the reality of this situation, in that this is not a sustainable way for normal people to live, and there's a systematic lack of care in this society, and they're just letting us die, essentially. Just leave us to it, and then blaming us and telling us we're the ones who need to fix the problem. That's not how a developed country needs to be run, and I think we need to just recognize that that's what's happening and fight against it in any way we can. Even if you just sharing memes on the internet about how wrong this is, even if you just commenting on shows like this, even if you go to protests and wave your flag and there's only 3 people there, we need to build, and we need to build very, very quickly. Find all of your people. You know, there are many, many of us, and we need to get people active. We need to get people willing to be active and willing to be loud about this, because I know a lot of people go, oh, well, I'm only one person, I can't make a difference. Well, that is the biggest load of rubbish. Every single person can make a difference, and we've really, really got to. And just try anything. Try anything, please. We can't carry on like this.
I would feed into something that Carl said. He said solidarity and pay demands. Now I'd go a little step further on this one. I think he's absolutely right. We do need to show one another solidarity, and I think we need to show pretty much unconditional solidarity with people who are like-minded to us, people who are struggling, people who are on our side of this battle between the haves and the have-nots, you know, and that's increasingly becoming the old like 99% thing from before. It's probably even worse now. You know, there are a greater number of people who are facing struggles than there ever have been before. We need to show those people unconditional solidarity and try to bring them around to our way of thinking by also showing them respect, listening, and meeting them where they are and speaking to them in a way that they understand, bringing people around to our way of thinking and trying to bring people with us, because the only thing that we have is our numbers, because we don't control the state, we don't control the establishment. We're seeing the way the political scene is at the moment. That is not a healthy political system, where we're seeing the establishment kind of not really talk about this very much. They seem to be more bothered about like whether someone turned up to a birthday party or not, and these are the important things, you know, the things that really matter. Years and years of neglect of our people, years and years of neglect of our infrastructure that has led to this situation where we are going to face a massive decrease in our standard of living, and we're already seeing life expectancy go down. So offering that unconditional solidarity to the people who really deserve it, whilst at the same time not assuming the best of our leaders, because far too many people are kind of saying, oh, Boris Johnson, poor Boris, you know, he nearly died, he actually means well. It doesn't mean well. They've got an entirely different system that they care about. They want a small state that backs business, that will be there to make sure that big business doesn't go bust. They are not there for small business owners. They are not there for ordinary people. They are not there to educate children. They do not care about the same things as us, and that needs to be widely accepted. You know, people need to stop going round and going, shock horror, what has Boris Johnson done? Actually, I thought he was a really good guy. He's never been a good guy. Why are people pretending that? Why are the media establishment and why are the political establishment like kind of like, oh, well, it's not becoming of a conservative, and whitewashing all these things from history, these terrible things they've done, this terrible ideology that they have. So think the best of people who are like you and on your side, and think the worst of the people who are trying to make your life terrible. That is not an unreasonable thing to think. So that's what I would say. We're gonna close up now by saying what we have got going in Socialist Think Tank at the moment. Think tank. Socialist Think Tank at the moment. Laura, have we got any nice developments that you want to talk about?
We have. We've got a cracking show lined up next week, all about education. I'm going to step aside for that one and leave it to the teachers. It should be really, really good. We are bringing Political Unmuted back on Tuesday. John will be taking a break for a while. We're not letting them go. So we've invited some absolutely fantastic guest hosts on. So the next few weeks, you're going to see a few different faces actually presenting that show with us. So really looking forward to that. That'll be really exciting. And we've got some new t-shirts coming out. I'm so excited. we just received some new t-shirts today. They're all available if you go onto our website and have a look at the shop. All the badges we've made for all the different campaigns that have been going on, the I Can Loach one, the one of John D. Clare's face, the Palestinian Solidarity, the LGBT one, we've got loads, are all now available in t-shirt form. So go and have a look, get one and spread the Socialist Think Tank love. We're not really making a lot of money from these t-shirts, but it's not about that. It's about sharing what we do and trying to get our message out there. So please go and get yourself one, because they're amazing. I'm going to buy one a month until I've got them all.
and they're ethical as well, aren't they? We've
Yes,
chosen an ethical company to...
of course.
Yeah, we do care about those things. I got a lovely tie-dye thing, you know, I've gone all colourful. But yeah, they are really, really nice. So go and get them. If you want to become a member of Socialist Think Tank, you can do that. You can get involved in our discussion. Our Discord's getting more and more popular. I'm going to give a shout out to all the people on the gym tanks where we support each other in our physical health. And that is not telling everyone to lose a load of weight or put on a load of weight or anything like that. That is supporting everyone in their own journey to be lovely and healthy, and it's not about looks, it's not about that kind of thing. It's a nice little aspect of Socialist Think Tank, the kind of thing that we do on our Discord, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. Then also, if you want to become a member, it is free, but we do accept donations as well if people would like to donate to Socialist Think Tank to keep what we are doing going. We are a member of IMA, we are regulated by Impress, who are a very, very fair regulator and do accept that we will always try to tell the full truth. We are not allowed to lie. So that is our guarantee that we can give you. And if you do think we're lying, tell Impress and they'll come and they'll come and deal with us. So yeah, if you do want to do that, go to socialistthinktank.com, become a member, and get involved in what we're doing. If there's anything you want to do that we can support with, please do get in touch. If you want to be on a show, please do get in touch. I'd like to finish off, so some of the viewers and listeners won't know this, the reason we've been off for a little while has been because John's lovely wife Barbara, who was our great friend here in so for me and Laura, we knew Barbara really, really well. Sadly, she passed away. She was a lovely, lovely human being, and we want to pay absolute tribute to her. Some of you will have seen her in the Political Unmuted shows when she came on at the end. We want to live up to Barbara's legacy because she was an absolute star of a person, a lovely socialist, and you know, even her funeral was political. So we've taken a little break from that. That's why John's having a little break as well. His seat will be kept warm by our guest presenters rather than his seat going to someone else. So it's still John D. Clare's show, Political Unmuted, on a Tuesday, but we will have some amazing guest presenters who will do a fantastic job. I'm absolutely sure of that. So we will look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon. Yeah, so it'll be Tuesday, and then we're back next week. We've got Daniel Kebede, who is the president of the National Education Union. We've got James Whiting, who is the general secretary of the Socialist Educational Association. I'll be there as the host, but also being a teacher and a trade unionist, and I'm also on the national executive of the SEA as well, and Rochelle will be coming on as well to give a different perspective again on teaching. So she's also a teacher. So we'll have a good show next week.
Rochelle's back.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing Rochelle. So thanks again, everyone. We will see you soon, and look after each other and show each other that unconditional solidarity. See you later.
Keep the red flag flying, yeah.